Senator Seward.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. Tonight I rise to talk, I think people hardly find it surprising, about the ongoing shark slaughter going on in Western Australia. This is reckless, it's cruel and it's needlessly destructive of sharks off the coast of Western Australia. And it is being perpetrated by the West Australian Government. And just so we're really clear here, the Abbott Government is also directly responsible for this foolish policy. If it was not for the exemption that has been granted, the exemption of the application of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act, this cull would not have gone ahead in this manner, and it certainly would have been assessed. We do not believe this is appropriate policy, and we also don't believe that the Premier of Western Australia or the Abbott Government should be excused and be able to hide behind the fact that the excuses that the Environment Minister made for allowing this exemption to go ahead. The Prime Minister, just as late as yesterday, again voiced his support for this cull. In fact, he said he might try surfing when he's in Western Australia during the election debate. His government has allowed this cull to take place by granting an exemption under Section 158 of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. The purpose of this exemption was put in place, remembering that the Howard government in fact brought in this legislation in the first place, as the exemption would indicate, for exceptional circumstances, for example, for emergency things like defence, security or a national emergency, for disasters and things like that, or if urgent action needs to be taken to protect an endangered species. I use the word protect, not for culling a vulnerable species, which is what is happening with this particular piece of legislation. The government has essentially looked for what it could use under the Act to exempt this cull. If you look at the exemptions that have been made in the past, they have been in relation to devastating natural disasters such as floods or bushfires, or response to human-made disasters. For example, you could look at the Montara oil spill. Imagine if the Environment Minister had actually used the Environmental Protection Act to protect the species that he has responsibility for protecting, and that is, of course, the great white shark, but also the mako shark. The mako shark is listed as a migratory species. The federal government has a responsibility to look under those species under the Environmental Protection Act, but also under the conventions that we have signed. This exemption was granted to the WA government on the basis of a series of conditions, and that in particular they would use hooks that would minimise the environmental impact on smaller sharks. They didn't use circular hooks that are used in other countries. They have used hooks that are having a devastating impact, and the calculations now is that over 70 sharks have been caught. Most of those have been undersized sharks. 2 of those are mako sharks that, as I said, are protected under the Biodiversity and the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. Now, when I was asking in estimates, the officials that I was asking around the need for assessing those conditions said that they wouldn't be because there's been a granted exemption. I have a letter from the Minister about the shark cull where he said, amongst other things, any breach of conditions will result in the exemption being terminated. Why isn't that exemption being terminated when quite clearly those conditions are being breached? They have also caught 2 mako sharks that are protected species under the Environmental Protection Act. When I asked in estimates I was told, well, the department could only act if a species covered by the Act was caught. Well, 2 species by the Act have been caught and killed. Why, therefore, is the Minister not ensuring that these conditions are assessed and, in fact, the exemption terminated? Because the WA government has broken the exemption, an exemption that should never have been granted in the first place. The Minister for the Environment needs to carry out his job and needs to terminate this destructive, cruel, barbaric policy.
Senator